day job. It means
and this is why the binary is bullshit.
Yes, one of the many reasons.
I mean, honestly, I thought it would take a lot more than 50 minutes to describe that, but it was very succinct.
Thanks. Physics, man.
Well, here we are again on the Sometimes stream.
Where everything's made up and the points don't matter.
I'll have you know, I keep a spreadsheet.
You do.
Then as a secret binder of the points, and at the end, when we do our final adventure, the number of points we have is the number of hit points we lose.
Wait, can it be like binders of points, like binders of women, though?
Binders of women. At the end, I will tally the cost and be like, you win, you lose, you win, game over forever.
And then all of us die. Yeah.
But like, that's how D&D works, right? Is people win and lose.
It's about winning. Yep. That's how life works, actually. It's because life is about winning. So
it's about victory. It's about working hard and or also, I forget
pulverizing.
The rest. Yeah.
D&D is not about winning, which is why we've made a game where you can win.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Victory.
Because that's what we need. So we were gonna fill that niche.
This all checks out.
Yeah.
So
greetings, malingering questers.
Hi.
There you go.
We are being facetious and sarcastic heavily. Binders of winning.
I guess I'm not Facilitated today. I'll change my name.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're always those fake people as well as our real people. That's an interesting. That's a whole nother topic.
I usually go by my small name. Not my big one.
I like that small name.
The big one is,
Ethan, do you want to kick it off with like what we're talking about?
I suppose so. I guess. Yeah. So we're here with the Sometimes stream Chatty, I suppose the Sometimes Chatty, a talkback with the actors and players from the Sometimes stream. The ongoing live play of the Sometimes Kingdom, the RPG.
Cool. That's good. That's succinct.
We're here with Erica, best number never sing, Ben, the Demon Knight Fasole, and Wide Marshall, DCI Beans, the naturalist talking skunk. And me, the Geometronics, which is what GM stands for, everybody.
Real.
Oh, I like that. Real talk. So the season's over. We still have to schedule the next season, don't we, guys? That's like
we do.
I think so.
I think for the first time, the seasons will be asynchronous with the seasons in the Western Hemisphere of the regular world. I believe we're going to be scheduled for September. Yeah.
For clarifying, because I was like, regular world.
Yes, I wasn't gonna.
Sorry,
because then then things stop getting real and
the
start
lore
getting
queen
regular.
was like, must interject.
Technically,
continuity.
We will be starting summer at the end of the summer.
Right.
So
Depending.
By that.
It does depend on scheduling. How does everyone feel? Does that affect the game in any way? I will say I don't find it affects the game, but I also am not making that part of the game as much.
No,
so I don't know, Ethan, if
I
that's
don't think.
issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to affect the game too much. And let's be real with hot climate change summer. I don't think it's going to matter. I think it's still going to be very summery, at least here on the eastern seaboard of America.
Yeah.
So I think it'll still be summer-esque, which dark.
Fair.
I mean, I feel like the seasons we've been doing are sort of like the seasonally appropriate, like kinds of things you'd watch on TV too, right? There was like the haunted house themed fall one. There was the gala themed winter one. There was Pokemon in the spring where we were traveling through the forest.
Pokemon
after the gala, then the forest. That's how special events works.
Pokemon is a traditional topic for the spring, as everyone remembers from like, romantic poetry class.
What's Calvin and Hobbes? In the wagon, not in the sled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess one question. So I think Ethan, you had a good proposal for some stuff to talk about. Unfortunately, we're not joined by Jeff Beltran, who plays Hirsute.
He died.
He's actually going to be a skeleton next time. So next season, he will be literally a skeleton.
Yes,
he's getting the surgery.
He's getting the surgery. Yeah,
it's a deflensing surgery. It's very costly, but worth it. Instant undeadness.
He's fine.
It's so hot right now. Like people are removing buccal fat, they're just removing life. It's so much like that's the real hotness for the year in Hollywood.
Hansel is so hot right now.
Damn, that her suit is so hot right now.
Her suit is so hot right now.
He's even more desiccated than last we saw him.
The Durastute campaign.
Yeah. That's the crinkling of, phalanges as that's. Yeah, what was the question?
I mean, maybe you want to talk about the game, and
yeah,
we're going to talk about sort of mechanics. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, take it away.
For the first part of this, that's definitely I would love to hear from players. We can start talking about the spring campaign itself, thoughts about it, moments, and then we can also talk about each of our characters a little bit. Me playing the character of the story, I guess. I don't know, the antagonista.
Well, like all the characters who aren't
all the NPCs, all of them.
And we have to remember every single one of their names and their ending hit point total.
I have a spreadsheet.
You will be quizzed.
Yeah.
Do you want us to talk about our characters, or Ethan, do you want to reflect as a GM on like the arc, and also as the co-designer of the game and the designer of the world, or co-designer of the world now with Erica, how the game has shaped up? We've talked a little about this, but like any brief thoughts on like how it's changing in terms of your thoughts, either running the story or like building out the playable RPG, or
I think that like the thing that's been like I'm really glad that we're doing this, aside from like it's just a hoot to do this with people. It's super fun, and I'm looking forward to the podcast episodes and stuff. But like aside from that, I really think that like this has been the playtest run, like the official playtest run of the game, and I think doing it in public is a really interesting exercise, and I think it's been super helpful. I think like based on everybody's sort of like thoughts and feedback, I'm really sort of excited, and this is jumping the gun on the second half of this podcast, but as Wythe and I start working through the mechanical changes that we think will really kind of like reflect the world and the narrative and the meaning of the game a bit more. And I think that's really great. I feel like this spring one, I don't know if it was just the time or whatever, it felt like, I mean, all of them are kind of madcap. That's kind of like that's the brand. This one felt like well, it's the world. This one felt like especially breakneck madcap, which I did not hate. I don't know if that's because the map itself had to cover so much distance, or whether it was all, this one was more than the other ones, like being funneled. It started with this fan out, and then it was definitely going to be like coming to like one sort of funneled conclusion with the encounter with Bellish Saint Marlin. The absolutely he had a totally original idea of creating beast orbs, mechanical objects, which could entrap beasts, people, and entities, and then use them to fight each other in something that is in no way like any sort of recognizable intellectual property, and also not at all like bear baiting. Not like cockfighting, bear baiting.
Like the normal ass, very real bear baiting that already exists.
Sorry.
I thought it was super interesting. It felt like, even though he was sort of a late sort of like encounter, it felt like everybody really fucking hated this antagonist more than any of the other ones so far. It was just the general sense of just like really wanting to like do him in.
We met like 3 people that he screwed over, right?
Yeah.
And they were sort of unhappy about the situation that had been created. And we empathized with these animals, right? They're people.
Yeah. Animals are people too.
That's what I keep saying.
Which is, I feel like it can be difficult in a fantasy game because people don't want to see animals be hurt, but you can also play as talking animals who are technically people in the form of animals, like permanently. But, the gruesomeness of attacking monstrosities, and then the sort of the division of that between like a monstrosity and like an animal or a beast or a person, like it gets a little woolly in a world like this, and hopefully that like the grotesqueness of that, like the deliberateness of that choice, like comes a little bit more plain when you've got something kooky like Shmokemon, except playing it out economically of what that would actually look like.
Well, and Erica, I think you always like personalize a lot of the NPCs, like or like the animal NPCs for us by like becoming them, and then so we get to like talk to them as you.
Yes.
Your character's ongoing obsession with swapping minds with other creatures.
Sensory experience, swapping minds, and understanding beings in creation on an atomic level. Yes.
Yeah.
And that, well, it's fun because it does that. It personifies the animal. And what it does for me is it asks the question, what if you are being instead of doing? And
I feel like that's a really good tell us or like open-ended question for a character who is essentially a mind magician like that, like a psychiatrist slash. Yeah, I think that's a really great like open-ended sort of like pursuit, obsession, and also like what is that like? What does that mean? Will it ever be answered? Like who cares? In the meantime, you're a whale or a forest monster or this or that or you know.
And maybe one day I'll get good at being them and they'll like it. And I'll get to do more stuff.
Let's not take any conclusions here. Yeah.
Who knows?
Someday. Yeah.
I do feel like Besmer and Christine, the car, have like unfinished business.
Definitely. I'm so glad Jeff isn't here to counter that in any capacity.
as a you know, there's a knock at your door. There's a pink car like ready to run you down at your actual front door. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Beep beep.
Sound effecting. Yep.
Yeah, I guess sort of
grunts.
Any other sort of like around the room sort of like thoughts, open-ended queries about the mission or about your character or the world itself, experience of playing it, etc., and so forth.
Have we been doing what you expect us to do, or have we really been throwing wrenches in your plans?
It is a full-on half and half. Like I would say half the time, like it is fully like this is like excellent. Yes, this is like, you know, I didn't put this on rails, but you're sort of like, you know, running the little engine of like, oh, these characters and what they'll do, plus like the available choices in the world with like the very frenetic missions, the quests, and then half the time it's like, what? I don't really. I feel like Jeff is sort of the undisputed master of the curveball in terms of like actions.
True.
Which is sort of it really works for a character who is like both set in their skeletal ways, but then is also just like an absolute maverick. So that's true. I would say also at co-equal sort of curveball, I feel like DCI Beans is a character who like is, I can see what they're doing and but like how they go about it or what they want to, it's sort of like it's always a surprise. At this point, yeah.
I feel like a lot of it's like narrative, like what's interesting for the narrative, because just fighting, you know, monsters a straightforward way is like very expected, and I think Jeff has a great sense of that as like an actor. I think we all play different roles there, but Beans as a character, I think realistically, like murder cops, like normal beat cops, just shoot people with guns, but like detectives are normally out doing detective shit. You know, they're not necessarily like fighting in the streets. And Beans is like an older, like high ranking detective. It's so while he happens to be now a skunk wizard, like his instinct is not to like head on, like, oh, I'm gonna like bite this guy. It's more like let me go like solve the problem some other way. So I think it's good to have a mix. I think it's fun to have the head on, like, you know, knights fighting monsters kind of conflict. I do think Erica provides the most interesting moments with the whole like I'll become the monster. What's that like? Which is it raises questions like narratively, mechanically, philosophically. Like it makes it sort of hard in every way, but it also is like really
Can
fun.
We kill her now?
Suddenly we're in like the worst social situation.
Oh, sorry, what was that, Ben?
Suddenly we're in the worst social situation, which is like, I stole your body.
Zombie, it's fine. So many moral questions that are left unanswered. That just raise further moral questions. Yeah, those it's sort of like it is now expected that the unexpected will happen, especially in that thing, but like the timing of it and the specifics of it, it is raising like philosophical questions in the best way that I was hoping for this particular like genre, or I guess like trying to carve out a new sort of space in fantasy, it is also raising mechanical questions that Wythe and I have to answer. But I feel like we're doing a pretty good job, spreadsheet wrangling at the table on that. What is natural for Skunk Wizard is an excellent question. A snifter of brandy, a good book about cabbage. I don't know.
Well, and you
I
have the
will
running
say-
joke where it's like lightning bolts are normal parts of detective work.
You're mute.
Oh, Wythe, you're muted.
I muted myself, whoops. Which is also part of me trying to figure out as a player the rules of this game, as opposed to having played a lot of like D&D and OSR, basically D&D. So it's like, wait, in this world, what is like, both it's more normal because it feels like the social situations are more normal than ye olde Conan the Barbarian type societies. But also everything is magical and there's talking skeletons. So it's like even more weird than I think normal D&D. The social situation is totally unrelatable. Everyone is either a serf or Conan the Barbarian as king, but like everyone is more or less human, and it's like supposed to be weird when you meet someone else. And this world like inverts both of those, and I think that's kind of fun and pleasurable to be like, I guess if ergo, like if I'm a normal cop and it's normal to accidentally be turned into an animal and like whoops, then like yeah, I guess in my armamentarium of like cop moves, one of them is like hurling lightning bolts. And like I don't know, like maybe that contradicts something you have in mind lore wise, but it's just one of the many. Like I don't know, let's fucking go with it. So
yeah, no, it's perfect because it's also like you can imagine, like a cardboard lightning like launches itself out of like a darkening sky, and somebody's like, "Oh crap, the cops are here, we gotta go!" Like, if you take it to its logical conclusion, where if this is a known thing, then it's also like its lead up, its effects, and its fallout, like in its anticipation, like trying to like if that's the case, then it's like, yeah, let's yes and that situation, like trying to create a game where you can yes and things, but then once they're yes anded, treat them like gospel and sort of like deal with all of the ramifications of that. Like even if everything is incredibly unrealistic and magic is still like this unknown, like it is not a force, it can't be bottled or contained. Is it a field? Is it like some ineffable part of this version of nature? It's like that specific thing is like its source is left undescribed, but outside of that, like having all of the kinds of like social and political realism that you'd have in the actual world, where a world where this kind of zany magic is like normal, like, and that includes all of like the bad and the difficult and the grotesque and the gruesome and the violent like aspects of it.
I think that's also like it's interesting that both of your characters, Erica and Wythe, have found like really it's one spell that sort of defines each of you, right? Like Beans is hurling lightning around, and now also turning into animals, and like Bessemer is turning into like the people we meet.
Everything.
Guys,
the like power gets crazier as time goes on. You just wait.
Oh god.
See what I become.
That's become the sort of defining features of them. Whereas I think with Fasole, and this is something I'm interested to respec, because one of the things we're going to be doing with the rule of magic changes is we're going to like build our characters again from scratch, is maybe finding a thing like that for him. Because the thing that I've found is, well, he's gonna, whenever we provoke a thing that will instantly kill us, he's just gonna stand in front of it and get hit. Like that's the thing that I feel like I have found is his niche, partially because I think in sort of like, terms of a character role, he's like the naif maybe, and so it's like, oh well, I'll just do my job. Ow.
Well, and there's a lot of really beautiful symbolism there, whether you want to go to Guardian Angel or Romaine Patterson's Angel Action for Matthew Shepard. Like there's and then now we get to talk about the things that like our characters think, which we don't always get to say, but like Bessemer looks at Fasole and she's like, yeah, that's an angel, because that's someone choosing to be an angel. And what does that mean? And then I go as a partial creator in this, I go, okay, so how can I affect the demon class so that there is access to, or I look at Beans, which by the way, that character is now a character in my everyday life. Like I just talk like Beans sometimes, like at my house. So I want you to know that's the highest form of
that is really high form of phrasing.
Yeah. So just There you go. And wondering like how does your emotional trauma translate when your body form changes, and what are the opportunities that DCI beings could lean into? Is this something to embrace or let go of? And then what part of that psychological development drives which magic Beans chooses to use when dealing with this conflict versus this conflict? So there's a lot of like really excellent groundwork that's been laid by you all by character choices that are, whether they are inherent metaphors onto themselves or like just proving themselves to be true over and over again, that really like drives home how we think as people in this world that's kind of every single individual is a different thing. So you have to approach it and think about every single individual person and thing as a different thing, constantly forcing you to be incredibly flexible. And it's to loop back to the last Chatty, it's proving itself over and over again and making the macro into the micro. It's very, very fun to watch you all accidentally create things that were half created already.
It's an accident on purpose.
It also bridges really nicely into the whole mechanical discussion, because you're bringing up like two of my favorite things, Erica, which is, you know, theory and game mechanics. And you know, it's kind of like this big question that I think especially you and I have raised with like, what does it mean to be an animal? Or like, what is the difference between a human an animal, an angel, you know, like these weird, this is kind of like medieval categories, or like the, you know, Borges's like Chinese encyclopedia kind of way of describing things, but it also in some ways is like more interesting than the daily lived experience of like, oh, humans are clearly different. And then you get very quickly into like, well, why, right? This infinite regress. And like you and I are exploring that in these very goofy, very different ways of like jumping into animals who are not smart, quote unquote. Whereas I'm doing this opposite thing of like always being one animal who is smart, and then slowly losing like the human side. And just the things I'm grasping onto are like, it is weird, I realize, and I don't know how much it's actually funny versus just annoying to repeat that, but it's like my idea is he's playing out the kind of tropes, like his version of Kojak or like Luther, but like because it's not actually Kojak or Luther or any of the cop shows, you know, I've watched, it's like a magical version of that with lightning bolts made out of cardboard. And so it's like a weird like, oh, I guess all I have left are these memories of culture. But, you know, I don't know if that's how, like, if you took, like, I guess what I'm saying is it's interesting because you could cross it both ways. You can have animals being human and humans being animals, and it just gets real weird. One thing that raises flexibility, also, I love that you touched on that, is we just kind of redid the magic system, and Ethan and I are hoping that in the next season, so I don't know if Ethan, if this is a good time to transition to that.
This is a perfect transition.
We're hoping we can transition to this new magic system, which is, I will say I was just kind of really inspired by this new OSR game called Grimwild that has this kind of Oracle based, like you get a bunch of magic words and you have to figure out how to combine them. And there's light rules for sort of GMing it. But we were like, let's do this, but times a million and make it all highly mechanical so that it works elegantly. But what it means is, the number of different spells you could cast is, I think we tried to do the math and it's like just a really gigantic number. It's like 12 Google billion, because there's a lot of words to choose from and you don't need, you know, there's a lot of permutations basically. So it's going to be very different. Instead of defining ourselves by these like very specific spells, I feel like everyone is going to have the challenge, because everyone in the system can cast spells, of like defining yourself by like how you use, you know, this set of magic words and like make spells, which hopefully will be fun. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to have 4 real weird episodes and then switch back do something else.
Yeah, it's like I think that it is like both elegant and bonkers, and that's sort of my favorite. Like it kind of allows people to be as creative as they feel like being. It can be randomized, and they can randomly pick words off of their table. You know, there will hopefully be some examples of like kinds of spells that can be made, and like the GM will have like a really accessible, like really sort of like solid table of like helping players realize the limitations of it, and then can, even if like players are trying to min-max too much with something, or it's like they're trying to like grasp at a spell like that's beyond their like fundamental like amount of grit that they can use to cast it, then it's sort of like, you know, the GM can sort of play act as like, you know, going back and being the council of the seasons, or the person who like helped them learn magic in the first place, and be like, oh no, well, you know, your thesis on magic, it should be like blah blah blah, and then it's like spell approved. You know, and I mean, hopefully like trying to facilitate the loop having table talk.
If it's helpful for the audience just to note, like how this works for Fasoli in the current version, the like version that we're updating, is like I have 4 tags basically, magic tags, and for spells I'm allowed to learn combat spells, and that's it. And then for magical items, I am allowed to learn to use combat and summer items, and I'm forbidden from using spring items because I'm a demon. So like those are currently like the limitations and the lists that I was pulling from for the things that were on my sheet. And so it sounds like we're adding a lot more of those tags and they become what makes the spell, which seems really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the tag system itself is sort of like the pipes of it are kind of going to be buried in the dirt. And the word list will sort of be presented as is. And so because there's 4 seasons and 4 seasonal schools of magic that are tied to it, each word list is going to be a completely different vocabulary list. Like, you know, and the words are going to be sort of like vaguely assorted by the tags and by like the different like, you know, vocations and classes, but that's not going to be super apparent. It's going to be like up to people to like make those decisions. So really like the words that you're going to be limited by are simply the school of magic. Those words are like have been sort of, you know, chosen to really kind of reflect the vibes and philosophy of each season. And
over
so
weeks and weeks
over
and weeks
and
of
weeks and
laborious
Erica like
thesaurusing
poured through the entire lore book and like
brainstorming and being like, okay, what's your trauma this week? What were we building into? Which season do we build that into?
Literally, a lot of personal damage went into it.
It's beautiful. And let me tell you that when we say that there are these words you're picking through, we're talking like 7 columns of 6 words. You are choosing from a lot. They combine in all of the most obtuse and specific ways, depending on how you play. And it's going to be real. I think we're going to see a lot more of our players, and our players are going to learn a lot more about themselves while they're playing it through the new mechanics, which is going to be so fun.
Yeah. And one of the other big changes is like in creating your character, that is basically the kind of, aside from like your general understanding of seasons, keep the fictional world, but the seasons are places and the dead don't always die and stuff comes alive. You know, your experience of the lore of the world will be through your character creation. You will learn about the place that you're from, the island that you're from, the magic that you use. And the other kinds of things that you can do if you're just sort of like limiting yourself to that character will be kind of a mystery. So if you end up playing a campaign with people who are from a different season, they're going to be using a different like turnkey like mechanic, like if they want to do bonus actions with their, you know, or like, buffs or whatever with their spells, that'll be totally different. And they'll have a totally different vocabulary list, and they'll be from a different place, dressed differently, and know different things about the world. And that sort of like clash of cultures, I think, is gonna hopefully be like a really fun, like in quotes, conflict that will happen in game. Of like that sort of clash of cultures.
To build on that, because I think that's kind of like in theory, every game has like lore, and you're from like fantasy place or real place or whatever, and there are other places you could go. And then there's some games that are sort of no exit, like Cyber Metal comes to mind, or something, a game where it's like you can't leave, everyone's in one setting. But most people have that difference in setting as kind of a real tension. Or sorry, not necessarily real isn't realistic, but like a tension that's interesting in the game. But I think not everyone mechanicalizes it, and a lot of the attempts to do so have been really wild, like looking at like Oriental Adventures and like TSR era D&D. But so this was something I think where we wanted to change it to make it more seasonal, so the 4 seasons mattered a lot more. And I think that the tags like combat, environs, guile, like the kind of like what spell it is, like basically similar to some of the categories in games like D&D, but using sort of simpler language. That had kind of overcoded the seasons. And so to go back to the seasons, and you and Erica filled in almost all of the words in those charts. So it's 4 different charts for the 4 seasons, and they're 8x8 grids. And there's no, like the organization otherwise is just, is it a noun or adjective? And you can combine nouns and adjectives, whatever you want. I mean, you just have to like say it in a way that sounds cool to yourself, but there's no mechanical limit on that. The mechanical limit is like, you only get, to Ethan's point, a couple words, and only from one of those lists. So when you choose, it's like really defining who you are, because the words are different. And there are some other mechanical things there, but largely it's like hoping to align everyone mechanically and lore-wise at the same time around like you're sort of stuck in one of these islands where the magic, the vibe of it feels very different depending on which of the 4 islands it is. But obviously they trade, they move around, so it's not like you're limited. It just helps you feel, that is a thing that matters for your character. And I will say, if you think about games like D&D and even like Stillfleet, a lot of the options are just like, wow, there's a lot in the book, and one day I will look through it. But when I'm making my character, that's kind of a cognitive burden to be like, there's 100 pages of spells or like weird powers. So I think with this, it was also like, how do we have less cognitive burden? So there's only that one page. It's like one spread, right, of just a bunch of words. So you could kind of read it all, I guess. I mean, it's just a bunch of words, right? They're cool words. They're well chosen by Ethan and Erica, but it's sort of more like when you get into it when you're making your character from one of those 4 lists, and once you've done that, you don't need to go back until you gain a level and learn more magic. And so you slowly are kind of engaging with the world in that sense without having to read hundreds of pages, which makes the game, I think, hopefully feel more approachable and just different, frankly, from the way we were approaching it. Is just how I've approached a lot of game design, which is like, just come up with a bunch of cool ideas, write as long as you need to make them really cool. And that's fun. I still like that, but that's like one style of game design. So this was just an attempt to like really be like, let's Thelma and Louise into this other version of game Magic Kingdom. And hopefully it's fun. Are certain words only accessible to higher level people?
All of the words
Great question.
are accessible to everybody. However, the leveling is going to be like a function of your vocational like level. It is like going to be a combination in terms of like internally, like diegetically to the game, this combination of like your ability doing things and going on more quests, and then also like your vocational like certification or training. So it's like, you are learning enough to like expand your grit and like, deepening yourself as a human being, having more experience, et cetera, but then also like you are being granted access to more words. So over time, depending on like what your class or vocation is, you will wind up having, if you're, for instance, a books major, very rapidly, like as you go through, the different levels and you accumulate it, you're going to wind up having like an absolute ton of spells. As opposed to like somebody who is a merc who is specializing in combat, like their stuff is still going to more be in the idea of like the crunchy mechanics of like combat. And then you will have less spells, but those spells, like you will probably get some kind of like reward for like, rolling combat spells. Anybody can do any kind of spell, but like if you wind up doing one that's more aligned with your job, like I think there is going to be, and we haven't worked out the specifics of it yet, but there's going to be some kind of like, bonus to sort of like encourage people to do that. But like, if you need other spells, you can make other spells and do them.
Yeah. You get like some classes will have the ability to do certain things more cheaply in terms of grit. So basically every spell costs 3 grit, and you can boost it at levels of 3, 6, 9, all the way up. You can just keep burning level units of 3 to change the X, like whatever the spell does by that much. So there's a very simple like magnitude chart, basically of just intervals of 3 you have to burn. But some classes it might say like you only burn 2 for each level. So that would be hugely like cheaper for certain. So the more grit you have, the more powerful you are magically. Yeah, and so that was something we were joking about. It was like, what if your first level and you burn all of your grit at first level? So you start with usually around 21. You could burn all of that and cast one spell that's like god level, and then you basically fall over unconscious. And like that's very anime. It's very cool. It's very fun. Character wise, it might be very annoying because like everyone else is like, okay, you really killed the hell out of like that one imp, but like we have to go, get the pirate boat. We have to like go do all this stuff now, and you're just like asleep. And so that was something we were okay with, of kind of the scaling, and it feels grit systemy. It feels Stillfleety without, but it's very different. It's not tied to rolling, so you can still boost rolls, but with spells where like there's no rolling. It's all you choose the effect and you choose the magnitude. But there's going to be a little bit of that fiasco. Like the GM gets to have final say on the effect, but you're basically choosing like if it does damage, you're like, this is how much damage it's doing, right? But certain classes will be better or worse at certain effects, and certain effects will cost more or less. And then there's like optional seasonal stuff. So you can always just cast a vanilla, but you can also use your seasonal, like I'm good at this type of thing. So again, we're going to have some mechanics. It's not going to be totally abstract, but it's meant to be much more fluid. We will see how fun it is, and if y'all have some better ideas when we get going. But Ethan and I are just going to try to do a baseline.
Oh my, yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking of like, sorry,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm just thinking of like, so in Stillfleet and other grit system games, like the way that you get more powerful as you level up are like, one, you get more grit and health, but particularly more grit. Like I usually just give myself a bunch more grit, because then it means like anything where you're burning a bunch, you can burn way more and do more powerful stuff more often. All right, like the anime moves like 5 times rather than like 2. But also it like the other thing that they do is like in Stillfleet, you get access to like more lists of powers that you can pick from. So like you get to level 2. Okay, you can pick from one list of advanced powers. Okay, you're at level 4 now. Okay, now you get a second list, like another list of powers where you can get stuff from. So like not only do you like diversify in abilities, but like you diversify in like ranges of abilities. So, and I mean, that's similar to the blister tree and blister critters where like you basically can like slant up the tree like through other classes essentially.
Right.
And so yeah, no, and so it sounds like here it's about like pure numbers, but also like amount of creativity you're allowed to have with words you've picked.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah,
that's excellent. Thank you for that summary. I'm gonna watch that later and transcribe it.
Do you also get to pick more words the higher level you are? Like use more words in a spell?
You get to use more words in spell.
Exactly it.
It's
cool.
We haven't figured out the specific like limit, and again that probably will be like classification dependent. But yeah, I think the idea is to be able to like expand like how wide a spell is as in addition to like how many spell get you.
Cool.
One thing to also in terms of like because I feel like accessibility and cognitive load is like my new kind of watchword for doing game stuff in general, and like my hope is by like having when you choose a spell, it's sort of like you select the combo of words because you and the way that you sort of like decide those words, that spell is then sort of baked, and then for as long as you want, you have that spell. And hopefully by like sort of like having them like be baked and settled once that sort of creative choice is made, then like you eventually like will be keeping track of like a longer and longer list of spells that you yourself have created. And hopefully, but that like sort of like that buy-in of like having been part of the creative journey of like creating them in the first place, and then not having to like keep track of all of those words, but just keep track of like the spells, and then like basically like a soup. We'll make it a lot
these
easier.
3 words last time, this is what it did. Now I can do that whenever I want.
And you can keep using the 3 words in a different combo if you want to, but it has to be a different spell.
And I really want to ask Erica what you think, because you've been probably the main spellcaster in our group, but just to follow Ethan on that, because I think it's an important note, is this is very much like Fiasco, hopefully, which is maybe a weird game to reference here, but it's like, because I actually think that dice rolling is not that fun, but the structure of it, like Microscope, is super fun game, and I just love the Coen brothers, so the idea of doing this neo-noir game was great, and it's a light book, so it's like in that book you don't have to do any screenwriting, you don't have to build a character, you don't have stats, so you don't have to like know a lot going into the scene, but in the scene you make a decision, you allocate dice, and I think it'll feel like that with Magic, because you'll allocate the words, you'll be like, oh crap, I really need to do a combat thing. Well, once you've done it, it's like a flashback moment. Like that is the thing you already learned. Like you're not doing it at the moment. You're doing it because you practiced it 100 times, and we're just seeing it for the first time. So to change it, you'd actually have to be the class books major or go to a books major and like pay them and like study with them. And that's actually an interesting constraint, because it means you have a lot of creativity, but once you have chosen, and every combination is different. So like entangle cold and cold entanglement or whatever are 2 different spells. So you can do a lot with like a small number of words, because even like 3-4 magic words, you get a ton of spells out of that permutation wise. But each time you define one, like that represents like, oh, that's how that's always been, like your tradition. That's just how that spell is. And so I think it'll make every game both unique, but like manageable in terms of cognitive burden, because you don't have to have a long ass spell book. You have to kind of keep bullet points of like, okay, I said cold entangle does, basically 3d8 damage over 8 rounds or whatever I negotiate with the GM, however we work on the mechanics, right? So
you're also writing a spell book. That's cool.
You were writing a spell. We got to
you're
figure
writing
out
like a spell chat book. You're like a little you're a little.
I never thought of that, because like it is like a wizard has a spell book. What if you wrote it as part of the game, and like you don't have to write it before the game? You just write it as the first time you do a spell, right?
Exactly.
Yes, and. Yes, and so yes, and there's more. This is the texting plus plan. So I love how you line that out, wife. And something I think that we were really trying, like circling the drain on for a while with this, is like we want playing the game to very much feel like playing the game, but also to in a way that is less maybe cumbersome, not to be negative, but like that it felt before. I feel like we felt a little jerky. We want playing the game to feel like being alive, right? So you wake up, you open the door to your bedroom, and if you have the experience that my dad had once when he was having a dream and 5 years old, do you know the dinosaur from Fred Flintstone is outside of your bedroom door and it's terrifying. Now you have to deal with that. And what do you do? And so if you are a magic being, right, who has access to magic, who has learned and has access to their own culture and philosophy of how things work, their belief system of like what physics is or how the world around them is constructed and how they relate to it and what the world even is and what to expect in it, that person now gets to make a series of choices. And if those choices are A, B, C, or D, that's really fun. But if those choices are A, B, A, B, C, A, B, C, D, A, B, B, C, D, it starts to get more, it quenches more. It's deeper, it's more intricate, that there's more of a web than a series of lines. And just to give you 1,000 visual metaphors that may or may not land with you. So as you're playing, then you go, oh, okay, I do magic. I've done cold entanglement before. And if I use cold entanglement, Dino's tail will probably wrap around his feet and there will be either ice blocks or hypothermia, depending on how literal of a spellcaster I am or how cartoony of a spellcaster I am. And then, but I also have access to these words and these ways that I think. So what if I go, I've done cold entanglement and I have access to adding an additional word now because I've just leveled up. I have more power than I'm used to. I've never tried cold entanglement precipice. What does that do? And so you get to learn in the moment, like how you learn in the moment by living. If you find a dinosaur in your hallway and you have to figure out what to do with it, because you've never done that before. So you shouldn't already have an answer for it. So there's this folio you've made of your own experience that is leading you to your next own experience that will become part of your folio.
If I am, go ahead, Ava.
Oh no, you go ahead.
If I am a child who grew up in Japan and I walk out of my room in a traditional house, and I walk out of my room and there's a dinosaur there. Well, if I'm stuck in a hallway, I can just run through the rice paper wall and get away.
Exactly.
This is a thing that I have access to as someone who grew up there. And if I'm magic, maybe I have a spell that means I can jump through any wall like that. Because I learned that as a child. If I am an American weeb child, I probably have a katana on my wall that I can use to slice the dinosaur in half. But
you cannot jump through the wall.
But I cannot jump through the wall. No, it's drywall. I would hurt myself.
I would simply cut through the wall at its weakest point and dash through it with the X that I made in a second using my incredible maul katana.
And this is the difference between like fall and winter, right? Like this is
and hopefully those sort of like the there won't be like bumpers for bumper bowling, but hopefully the sort of like the journey that you made in crafting your characters based on what seemed most interesting or delightful or maximizing your potential, like based on your initial choices, will explain that sort of stuff, and then have mechanical consequences. So the simplest one, like you and her suit, like having been your home region, and it's not described as like, it doesn't necessarily have to be where you grew up. It's just simply like what you like the island that you identify with. Yeah. So it's like if your island of origin or your home island is winter, and you choose off of the list of places like the city of Midnight, which where both of you are from. Like if you decide to re-roll the character and like keep it that way, then like there are like actual mechanical benefits. So it's like if like a gibbering creature with like 1,000 eyes that's like bleeding, like if you're 6 years old, like and like approached you in your doorway, and like with the character that you are from Midnight, it's sort of like your will is going to have that buff, or like you won't be terrified by the creature and it'll be like, oh, like do you want a cookie, or like, oh crap, somebody, you must be lost, let me go take you to like the person. Whereas like if you were a character, from Springside and saw something like that, it would be like, oh my god, kill it. And
this is a
that'll
New
all
Yorker running into a Joro spider. Yeah.
yes, versus
or
Yeah,
anyone running into a New York City rat.
Oh, come on,
they're so
they're
cute.
not me.
They're so cute.
They're
They're
huge. They're bigger than DCI beans.
Well, I
That's
don't want to
adorable.
fight them. I just don't. I'm not gonna. I don't want that smoke either way. But Ethan, I think it's interesting you raise that because I think that's from a design standpoint. It's like you can't make people do that if that makes sense. So it's kind of all about how do you incentivize? Like, okay, this is the behavior that lore-wise like makes sense in my head for my game. Like, what are some ways to do it? And I think before one of the issues of the game, even though it's a really fun game, is it feels like, there's all this lore stuff and it's like, how are we accessing it? Are we accessing it the right way? Or is the way we're accessing it kind of generic fantasy, like Stillfleet reskin to be fantasy, but over there is like Ethan's head, and how do I get into it? And I think one of the things we try to do, not just with the magic system, but as you're alluding to with all of character creation, is retool it so that every choice has a mechanical point, so that you're accessing a little bit of the lore as you choose those little character things and trying to keep the cognitive burden really small. So instead of like having hundreds of choices that are with lots of text read, it's like a few short things you pick, but they actually matter on your character sheet. And that way you feel like, oh, okay, like I'm learning something at least about this world. And yeah, so just reinforcing what you're saying, like if I'm from Midnight versus Copia versus a petty kingdom in Summerside, this is like gonna affect how I play the game, actually, at the level of rolling and like magic I'm casting, etc.
Yeah,
which I don't know why we didn't do that before, but now it's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot easier. I think.
Like, that's when you coming up with an innovation, you're like, oh boy, that is super duper obvious, but then it's like, well, you have to make that bridge of meaning making to get there, and then it's like, yeah, cool, now we can just say that we were silly for not coming up with early, but like, yeah, it took the one to do the other.
Well, and that was a lot of conversations, a lot of separate conversations over a period of time, and a lot of, I think, our discovery of our own personal journeys, probably even more so than I realized. Just realizing like what has felt accessible and what has felt inaccessible in playing games in the past. And I didn't grow up playing tabletop games, and I am riddled with neurodivergent spiciness, and it's lovely and spectacular and fantastic. But have you all noticed that I ask somebody every single time I have to roll for anything what I'm rolling? Because I have multiple Shakespeare plays in their entirety in here. I cannot for the life of me remember what I'm supposed to fucking roll. It drives me insane. And because I don't know, my brain must feel like it's an arbitrary connection between a D10 and this. And if I decided that the value of parkour is 10, then I would all of a sudden be able to do it, but I haven't decided that yet. And so what we wanted was for character creation to feel intentional. And so if you're making a choice, if you're learning something about the world, you're learning it because it matters about you. If you're learning something while you're playing, it's because you're relating to other people. But as you're building your character, it's how you relate to the world. And it is going to be playable and actionable so that it doesn't need to be in your working memory. It doesn't need to just be an arbitrary fact that you apply. It's a livable, tangible thing that comes up in a myriad of capacities in how you play.
And I think that sort of really gets to the heart of what like game mechanics are for. Like they're for having a fun time that feels fair or unfair in a way that feels great. But like it like ultimately, like, game mechanics are at their core about meaning making. And so trying to pair it with the meaning of what you're doing in the game. And like the ultimately, like, they build up to like the conflicts that you will have interpersonally and like in butting heads with or going with the flow of a world. Like I think like that increased level of meaning making will just automatically make things more memorable, to your point. Because it'll be like, you'll have to remember it because that'll be part of the core constituency of putting together like what is actually happening. And why it's happening. And that, I feel like that is already starting to feel like, that's how character engines work. That's how like contradictions of like, writing or experiencing thing work. So that's the hope. And I think it's going to work. In fact, I know it's going to work. Gosh darn it. I know it.
Well, it seems like a new way to sort of do exactly what you're talking about, Erica, within the system, right? Because right now, like, stats are like, the die you assign to your stat is one way to like how your character interacts with the world. Like My reason is a D4, so I'm not that smart. My reason is a D6. I'm kind of average at thinking about stuff. My reason is a D12. I'm a genius. Like my move, Fasole's move is a D4. He is clumsy. He's very clumsy, and like that's how I remember that.
Indestructible, yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things to roll because I'm like, well, he's gonna fail because he's clumsy.
Oh boy. The amount of surfaces that Fasole at this point has fallen off of or skidded across the ground in a metal suit is just fantastic.
We get the sort of riding, skidding face first. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Fasole's fine. Yeah. They don't need to change anything. They're succeeding. Perfect. Getting along great with a move of 4.
And I think that's something we want to pull across all the games eventually, honestly. So it may affect the other games too. It was just this realization. And again, we didn't make this up. A lot of games have elements of this built in, but I think it's funny even looking. So this was inspired by a game called Quest, and I showed it to Ethan, and it's like another OSR game. That's very light. It's very NSR, I guess I should say. It's very minimal, very pretty. Sort of like a nice version of like Bastards, right? It's like a white background, not a lot of art. But the system itself is a stripped down D20 system that the character creation is just mind blowing. Like everything else about it is like, cool, whatever. There's some cool class powers, but the character creation is all the series of questions. The one thing I found weird about it is like, it doesn't actually really tie them to mechanics, but it almost suggests that one could. And so looking at that, I was like, okay, well, we could just do that. We could ask questions, where are you from? What's your family like? And then whenever you answer, it's like, okay, you get this item. You get this extra magic word or whatever. And so those would be choices where you could min-max and choose the thing you want. You're like, I want a long sword and I want the word flame for the spells or whatever. But like kind of why, and also fine. I mean, it's not game breaking. I mean, everything is useful. You're going to get something for each answer. So it's trying to just rethink character creation a different way, as opposed to just, again, kind of reskinning Stillfleet. Like pick your job, pick your species, and then you buy some gear and go out. Which is ultimately a traditional D&D derived kind of way to do it. It makes sense for Stillfleet, I'll say, because it was a game about labor, the politics of labor kind of first.
Yeah,
but as much as Summer's Kingdom has that, it's like it's not mostly about that. Do you know what I mean? That's like one of the subjects.
Yeah, I will say that like the sort of the sumptuous spread outness of Stillfleet, like I feel like it makes sense for the core rulebook. Like I feel like you feel like you are being given a dizzying handbook to a world that you like impossibly have agency in, despite it being like a galaxy, the universe.
I mean, it's a whole galaxy in a book that is this thick.
Yeah,
that's it right there.
Right there. That's how that is. So it's like I think in sort of preferring, like when I started being like I really want this to be more like character creation driven, and that being more of the way to like start the experience of the world. It's very cool that like there are other people who have already like I think like created very streamlined versions of that. And I feel like with the sort of this laser focus on like trying to pair meaning making, character development, like exploring a world, along with the sort of like the core sort of like what will be like the magical tension of the game, the overwhelming amount of like problems in quotes that need to be solved in quotes, and the fact that the seasons are at each other's like throats all the time, like kind of I feel like it's going to like create a really kind of like easy to grok and easy to sort of play and very memorable, but then like also like I don't think it's going to shy away from like the kinds of like interesting sort of tensions and complications that would come from like just taking wacky ideas to their logical conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think also it's fitting because we're up to an hour. Maybe a little, we could, go a few more minutes because we started a little late, but Ethan, maybe it's time to think about also, is there anything else you want to make sure we hit on? I think we've summarized well what we're hoping to do, right? And then one of the questions is, how well are we doing it? So we'll have to ask each other, and maybe, viewers, listeners, hopefully the listeners won't get to the new magic system for a bit. Depends on editing speed, but we're gonna start putting out the podcast. But hopefully we can get some folks to start tuning in. And of course, we'll always have to ask Vex, who's been tuning in quite a lot and knows quite a lot about game design, for some thoughts. Other things, Ethan, is there anything else we should cover that we have not touched on, or obviously also Erica, Ben, anything you guys want to talk about?
Yeah. I think that was all very comprehensive. I think I guess the sort of the summer campaign, which is probably going to be coming in September, will be called Will Wonders Never Cease. So get excited about that. It is not as wordy as Winter, and that's because it's so hot that like words have leaked out of my head. So I'm losing my touch. It's not as obtuse and glotted as it should be, but don't worry, I'll pick it up again. I think the last sort of thing to think about is that in terms of like this, the way that this magic world is made, and I'd love people's thoughts about this in the future. It'll be a very charged conversation. This is an occult magic world in the sense that like this is sort of magic that is being tailored without gods, because the source of magic ultimately is not ever explained. It is coming from definitively, like canonically, whatever that means in a world without gods or deities outside of like the religions that people just like practice. That already is sort of like taking the ideas of like what myth is and how people relate to it, and like how magic works on a place like Earth and how magic works in a fantasy world that's sort of weirdly twinned with Earth in this bizarre way. I feel like there's going to be some really interesting political complications because of that. And I think that like, what does spiritualism mean in a world where spirits like have the vote? Is something that I kind of would love, the fact that like, essentially right now, all the different species of like, a demon is essentially like a different type of guy. They're not so fundamentally different from each other that like these entities are all totally alien from each other.
Guys, demons are just regular guys.
They're just regular guys.
This has been a PSA for spring.
I'm just a little guy.
Sorry to cut you off. I had to.
You're just an average knight with an average life. You work from 9 to 5. No, I'm not going to do a Rockwell song. Yeah. So I guess that was sort of a leading thing. Like I'd love for people to like think a little bit about what their character sort of relationship is to sort of the larger questions of life, if any, in a world, that is confirmed that like its supernatural powers are not coming from gods. People might religiously believe that, but that's like the spot of religion. So I guess it's sort of like or is everybody so workaday that those questions don't ever come up? Like, is it ironically a world so full of magic where like those larger philosophical questions have become pedestrian? Or alternatively, are there yet further unexplored, even weirder ideas? So that's a thing I'd love to touch upon in the future, to ponder upon.
The answer is yes. We'll talk more about it later.
Yes, and
yes, and
I mean, I have an answer for Fasoli, and it's based on something that you wrote in the book that we read, which is sort of one of the first things you talk about is that there are these like great heroes who live on the like physical outskirts of the islands, fighting these massive threats to everything, to existence. I think there's like what 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, there's a very small amount,
and there are these famous celebrities who you never see because they spend their time saving the world over and over again. And so I think I read that and I thought about, well, I'm playing a character who's trying to be a hero, so he wants to be one of those, right? Like we hear about these great heroes. Well, I want to do that too. I hear about these great people who save me every day. Well, maybe I can do that for others. Maybe I can help them. And that's sort of like the mystery in the book that becomes the mystery for the character. Because what are we going to learn about that?
That's really, I love that framing of it, like very, very much. I think that that is perfectly in line with and speaks to like Fasoli's character as he's sort of like being a knight, like the sort of like a mechanical efficiency of being a demon who refuses to use weapons, and then being a knight who has strong defense, like essentially acting as a shield to other characters. Like it's a very efficient use of numbers, what you have in the dice.
Yes.
And I think also like it crafts this very interesting, I think it was in the Winter campaign when Fasole moved to like block a giant metal planet that was about to like crush Bessemer. Like that was a very moving moment.
That's one of my favorite moments we've done.
It was so selfless and so mighty, like at the same time. Like it was really excellent.
But it was
Bessemer
fun too.
loves Fasole a lot. Bessemer just wants and I think that moment was a big part of it, but like she also sees the purity in you and just wants to watch you experience your dreams come true more than anything. And so like secretly behind, like, whenever you have a glimmer of something that you want, I'm like, I wonder if I can get that to happen later in the episode. Like,
how do I engineer? Yeah,
because Fasole really approaches the game like a child approaching a game. Like, Fasole approaches this world and is like, how can I show up and help? And that, I think, is such a beautiful way to explore so much, and provides such an excellent grounding place for other characters and for the rest of us to jump off of and not be and contain that. And you just like ground it in this beautiful thing. It's amazing.
You know, I think one of the like the mystery of who they are, like, I think will be answered. Well, one of them will be answered in the next campaign.
Ooh,
but aside from that, the idea, I think, like in including them in the game is partly to have that sort of like, you know, these mysterious, dangerous, powerful, violent, etc. people who are sopping up the worst of the worst. But like, you know, it does have that like sort of classic dragon game kind of idea of like, but then like with the twist of like, well, as players are like leveling up and getting more and more powerful and more spells, like eventually they might get their attention and there might be some additional complications, you know, from that. And sort of like, I don't think ultimately the game is going to be a meditation on what power means, but I do think that when you are accumulating skills and like literal magic power, you know, having there be other entities already there at the sort of capstone of it, like, you know, what that sort of means like for literal politics in this realm, and like what that's going to mean for character development is like, it is an open question, and I'm really excited to see it. So, you know, hopefully we will keep playing it to get to that level of complexity.
Because what you're giving us, the kinds of stories you're giving us, make it feel like the world is barely holding together. Like things could kind of collapse at any moment. And like, these four weird freelancers, like in some way, are actually extremely important to keep the fabric of society together, despite making like $50 every time they do it.
Yeah, it's like they're doing it for the goodness of the realm. It's supposed to be done for the public benefit, whatever that means. And like, what, you know, at the same time though, like these characters, like they don't necessarily have a monopoly on violence, but they are sort of like, it's almost like every single like regional government is sort of wiping its hands of what violence means. And it's like, okay, well, I guess since we've authorized this charter to let people go on questing networks, then it's like obliquely like people's violence does to a certain extent extend from the state, or I guess in the case of this world, like the city states and the seasons. But it is sort of like, is it, you know, the complications of like trying to describe what cops would be like in a world without cops, like that is still connected to like, you know, the regular world Earth, as a twist to sort of like, let's make it extra challenging to describe why things are so different and so samey at the same time. Like, I know, like it's attached to Earth, that's just gonna just like hit everything with croquet mallet.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the biggest dimensions of the game that hasn't been explored. So that's I think probably the to me the most glaring, like, is if it's going to be in the game, we got to put it in the game. But one of the really nice things about playtesting before you publish something is you can change the whole magic system and then be like, that was how it always has been, right?
Yeah, I was here the whole time.
Similarly, you can be like, oh right, Earth people have always just been hanging out. And I think that it is hinted, like it's in the lore of the world. You know, the old cars. I mean, there's a lot of like references, but I think we got to figure out a way to like integrate, you know,
100%.
How are people coming back and forth, if at all? Like, how much would that affect things, or how normal is it? So I think
I think talked a little bit about Earth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And
everyone gets mad when I sing songs I don't know the words to. I'm like, you idiots.
That's like another thing that needs to be like mechanicalized, but like exactly what that means. Like right now, it's just it's, you know, in that sort of list of intro, background, quick questions, some of them will be like, oh, I'm actually from Earth. Okay, well then you don't choose off one of the 4 lists. You get a smaller number of words from any list, right? I mean, that's just like a very simple way to just be like, you're learning magic because you're like stuck in Narnia, right? Basically. So I think it'll be fun to identify as a group. I mean, from the game design standpoint, identify those areas for like polishing and like make all of the, you know, fix the Rubik's Cube, whatever the metaphor you want to use is. I've never completed a Rubik's Cube, so please don't let it be that. Please don't let that be the test to being a good designer. We're over time. So any final thoughts? Anyone want to say some fun things they've not said, or should we call it there, folks? This has been the Chatty for Spring Summer 2024 for the Sometimes stream.
I don't care that magic is changing. I will still turn into as many different things as I can for all of you. Just know that it's for you.
That's such a good point. How are you going to choose? Like, you got to choose words that make sense, or I guess you just, no matter what you choose,
Swap
you're like
body.
the first time
you can
cast it. You're
well,
like,
I guess that is the last point. Like, just conveniently, a lot of the spells that people have had a fun time casting have been sort of like back inserted into the vocabulary list. So those spells might perhaps still be able to be part of the game. Yeah, I think maybe they will.
You got to show me. Yeah, I gotta make the new Matrix, and then we'll play with that. Awesome. So Erica, we're gonna see. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, I love that we've all seen it from different ends, and now we're like, wait, how are you gonna play with this? How are you gonna play with this? Already.
I'll say, having learned all of this on this call, like I came into this knowing nothing about this. It makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm excited to play with it for real.
Yay!
Yay!
We did it!
Everybody go home. Yeah.
So excited to see spellcasting change, especially how Erica's relationship to the psychologies of non-humans changes, since that's like a core theme. Anything, Ben, you're excited to cast, not cast, not be able to cast, depending on.
Well, or right, like I'm excited actually for Fasole's magic to like play more into like the rest of him, which I think I have been having trouble with.
Okay, interesting.
Sweet.
Ethan, last word. What are you most excited for once we finally schedule and pop off summer/fall?
Oh snap! I'm really excited. I think to sort of like see everybody kick the tires of what we got cooked up mechanically, and like, you know, learn their sort of like, or decide their place in that world, in time for like a massive political fallout to happen. So I'm really excited to see all the complications come down the pipeline.
Excellent. Well, we love that. So I guess thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching Vex, and we will see you in the Season's Keep.
See you in Season's Keep.
Bye.
Later, Questers.